Hello, my delicious co-creators. Lilou here in beautiful Sedona, enjoying the sunset here with Igor that I just met actually yesterday. This is quite an amazing story. I was right out of Dranvalo's workshop, and here I am walking, running out in the wilderness and bump into you. And I just knew this interview had to happen. And then after looking at your whole channel, your website, and the videos you put out, my heart just filled with, with love and connection and a deep connection, and I just knew this had to happen. So thank you for showing up, I guess.
Thank you for actually running into me, literally.
When things are meant to happen, they just do. Is that your sense of things?
Well, maybe they already happened, but we're just catching up with it.
So I want to hear all about your background, because I know you're this famous artist, painter, and now you're a spiritual teacher. You have been for many years. I was really quite blown away by the whole, and this is one of the conversations I want to have with you about getting deeper into the experience of life, this beautiful life, this bliss, because it seems like this is at the core of your teaching. There's a lot of people talk about energy transmission in your workshop, about many different things. So can you tell us, just back up a little bit and kind of tell us about your journey here on Earth?
Well, first I wouldn't say that I'm a famous artist, but I was able to make a very, very good living in London, and kind of like on the verge of the budding international art career, when something happened to me that essentially exceeded all my wildest expectations, wildest dreams of possibility of human existence. This is known as the descent of grace. It literally felt as a descent of grace. I'm not going to go into the details because I've covered it so many times that I would prefer to use this now moment of these exchanges in what I would draw the attention, perhaps, or what I would like to draw the attention in lieu of what is happening to us all as a collective, and how we live this moment in time, each individually, that existential quest, how we actually trying to rediscover that innate sense of happiness, that innate sense of belonging, innate sense of fulfillment. But because the life, it's like a roaring river with all that is like thrown into it, the time we live in now, at the beginning of the 21st century, that it's very, very becoming increasingly, I would say, hard to actually seeing clearly where that happiness comes from, what is the source of that happiness, where the fulfillment lies. And of course it's easy to repeat cliches that all happiness is within, and you go within, and these profound wisdoms have been repeated over centuries, over millennia, certainly over the past few decades. And yet we find ourselves now, at this moment in time, when that becomes paramount to our survival as the species and the whole planet. So,
but I thought, looking at a little bit of your YouTube and everything, I thought that really what's at the core of what you're teaching is to trust, and there's really nothing for us to do. It's already there. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. There are perspectives, of course. There are perspectives that actually you can encounter this perspective. You can see these perspectives from the high street of spirituality, from the main street and mainstream of spirituality, all the way to the most refined theological debates. That indeed, there are various perspectives on what really this spiritual quest is all about. On one hand, it is plainly clear that we are all one. At the fundamental level, we are all one. That's unified field. That whatever we call it, that level of unified field that is known in various traditions as the Godhead, as Brahman, the absolute, one without the second, and the one whose names cannot be spoken. However, that remains on the level of the idea. It has to be actualized and cognized, so that it's even brought to the level of cellular remembrance, you see. So whenever there is an opportunity for getting into this more, I feel that my job here primarily, upon this calling, is to remind people of their innate sense of divinity. But when we say divinity, it's not divinity in some kind of perspective, imaginative way. We're not speaking about here being divine in the sense that because we think we're divine, because we're part of nature. All this is yes.
It's not an adjective.
No. It's actually the very core of who we are.
Yeah.
And because the narrative of our existence, at least in the last, let's say, phase of our existence as several centuries, that narrative somehow has been replaced by this very bold belief that somehow we have this autonomous existence. The universe was objectified to a degree that we are only scrupulously studying various laws of nature, trying to click and unlock all these the most amazing mysteries and mathematically equating all this so that it gives us the possibility to explore this, and the breakthroughs gives us all, which also allows this kind of communication. However, with all that, the very, very core of our identity has been overlooked. And our identity is divine not because, as I said, it is mythologically divine or somehow hypothetically divine, but because at the very basis of our energetic setup, this, what constitutes human physiology, even down to the cellular level, is nothing but the manifestation of very profound divine energies. In other words, human physiology itself here is not just some kind of accidental causal byproduct of evolution, but rather a place of gathering, like the ancients used to speak. The place of gathering where these divine energies, they are here locked in a certain kind of juxtaposition when almost the fate of our immediate cosmic destiny is being decided. So
what is your recommendation so we can feel it? What are the practices, and how can we be that? How can we feel it? How can we reconnect to it?
Well, first of all, on one hand, we are already that.
Yes.
You see?
Yes. So we have to know that.
We have to first recognize that, literally recognize. Something which, when is completely forgotten, escapes us because it's simply forgotten. So the first step is to recognize our divinity. To recognize our divinity, we have to make that very, very bold decision to realize that the universe doesn't exist outside of our perception of it. So in other words, it's the very old-fashioned way of getting access to that which otherwise transcends the senses, the mind, and so forth. So no matter how advanced we are technologically, the methodology of consciousness are surprisingly quite old-fashioned. You see? Yes, there is a lot of excitement. Sometimes I receive letters where people ask me, well, don't you think there is a possibility in the near future, maybe not that far away future, with the advancement of neurophysiology, that we will be able to kind of given a certain a treatment, whether through the level of the chemistry, changing the chemistry in the body, or through some kind of sending us through the electromagnetic field, that all these practices, hours of meditation, would be redundant. We'll just lie down and like these impulses go through us, we come out done. Well, that would have been lovely, but I'm afraid it's a wishful thinking. Therefore, that propensity to go inward and to rediscover that innate divinity within is our job in this day and age.
Is that enough actually is that enough? Isn't there a healing process? Isn't there some things to let go from our past, some old memories? Or is it just by going within, actually everything dissolves and we are that?
Of course, this what makes this journey truly worthwhile. And that's why, despite the fact that there is this, what mentioned earlier, the perspective that all this is one, we are all one. Seeking itself is a contradiction, because how can that which is already one seek itself? It's a oxymoron. That is a perspective from the point of absolute. We speak from the perspective of the collapsed state of consciousness to a point in time. In other words, we speak from the particular perspective. And that particular perspective needs to regain its status of oneness. And not only regain that status of oneness, it needs to invoke it again and again, precisely because that is the very nature of being. This reality is not to be taken for granted, that this reality existed and will persist well after we've gone. We forget that we are co-creators. We create this reality, literally, by a sheer act of partaking in both projection and perception of this reality. You see, to me, this is terribly exciting, because this is where spirituality and science met already. Full circle is closed now. After centuries of separation, not only science rubbing shoulders, holding hands again with the most profound teachings that were present and carried from chest to chest from the time immemorial. So really that recognition is accompanied by the stages of purgation, by the stages of purification, without which no spiritual advancement is possible. We know that the greatest luminaries of the past, and not so distant past, had to go through that process of continuous unloading, continuous process of releasing all that psychic material that lays as a repository deep within our centers, which actually is not only just individually bound and binding the individual, it is also connects us to the collective. So in doing this work, in committing to this work, we're also doing a tremendous service to the humanity itself, to the time that we are now actually find ourselves. You know, this is a very, very important time. It's not just a slogan that, oh, we are living in terribly exciting time. It is a terribly exciting and important time.
Yeah. When you say the work, so what is the core of this work for you? Is it meditating? Is it sitting in nature? Is it smelling flowers? What is it?
It's everything, of course. It's above all else, it's turning 180 degrees. It's literally changing the attention. The quality of attention undergoes change. You see that the quality of attention, we are so subjected to the so-called basic quality of attention, which essentially is here because our life demands that kind of more superficial, I would say, quality of attention, or rather surface quality of attention. The quality of attention here goes to that who is experiencing all this, to whom this experience belongs. Who am I essentially? Who am I beyond my feelings? Who am I beyond my thoughts? Who is the witness of all this? You see? And meditation is the very kind of foundational grounds of that process, because though we can go around, you know, if the circumstances allow us to do that, no matter how many questions we've asked, no matter how many amazing little ahas and little satoris and little revelations we've experienced, all this can be truly transformed when we allow certain processes to take place, and they are taking place when the body is given chance to experience transcendence.
So surrendering, transcendence, huh? So how do you define transcendence for us?
Transcendence is simply going beyond. It's going beyond. Beyond of what? It's going beyond, first of all, of sensory perception. Because our sensory perceptions, though the windows into the world, that at the same time, they cover our perception because they give us only this objectified perspective of the universe, which is being perceived through the sensory apertures. But it's only a tiny sliver. Some scientists say it's only like something like 4% of the spectrum of all the frequencies. That's all we perceive through ears, through eyes, through nostrils, and so forth, right? So transcending here is going beyond the senses, beyond the mind, you know, beyond the feelings, beyond the intellect.
Beyond the ego.
Certainly beyond the ego.
Because that's a big one. Come on, I mean, this dude is quite, it's quite something. Because it's holding us back from really just living in this spacious, connected universe, isn't it? How do you see ego?
I have a slightly different perspective, maybe, on what is otherwise widely known today. You know, I would be hesitant to blame ego, because that would contradict the state of affairs, because that would give ego actually a superior position, and also a sense of autonomy. This is why when I was undergoing through these transformative processes, I felt that nothing comes from nothing. We all belong to something. Nothing really. Everything gives birth to something else. So there are traditions which have been uninterruptedly investigating into the domain of consciousness. So the science of consciousness existed in certain traditions and have been passed through generations to generations. Methodologies, understandings, a certain language even, and terminology are of tremendous value. And so ego is only part of the whole conglomerate, if you will. Without the ego, your body cannot function. My body cannot function. So it has its very distinctive purpose. Without the ego, you would not know whether these songs belong to you or your neighbor.
There's a side of ego that is holding us back, maybe from transformation, from not transformation, but for living who we really are.
Sure. I prefer
it's like protecting. It seems like it's protecting.
I prefer to view it through the lenses of the aperture of the experience, subjective experience within consciousness. Okay. In other words, there is another perspective on this whole business of the ego. Instead of seeing ego as some kind of entity, even if it's temporal entity, and then we discover that actually even ego has never existed, we can perhaps view it as being subjected to contracted state of our own awareness. Our awareness is contracted to a degree when it only identified or capable of identifying with this psychophysiological organism. Is that what we call ego? And then, of course, that psychophysiological organism have ideas, thoughts, and perceptions, so forth. But I prefer not to find the guy, on whom we can actually push it all and blaming it all, because really that the expansion of consciousness and contraction of consciousness is an amazing phenomena. It's an amazing phenomena, and in a way, in a nutshell, that the whole journey of unfoldment is very much finding oneself in precisely that epicenter of unfoldment, or the expansion and contraction of consciousness, where we simultaneously experience our magnanimity, our essentially infinite expansiveness, right, beyond any conception, and also as being someone here and now. Because let's face it, even the greatest saints functioned in this world, and often functioned very well. So they had to regain or remain a certain quality of that individuality which will allow them to function. So I don't want to continuously blame the ego. It's as if I'm advising or suggesting, let's push the kind of rules of the game a little wider. Let's introduce a different perspective. So because I'm all...
That's why I'm interviewing you.
Good one. So, like there are a lot of people who coming back and trying to relate. I've been on the path, not 2, 3, 4 years, 25 years, and still waiting for the death of the ego. Maybe someone said it because it was a metaphor, something flew out of the tongue as a poetic matter of speech. However, there is no such thing like death of the ego. You see, what we die to and what we are reborn to happens at every instant. We go to bed, we die to deep sleep state of consciousness. In a deep sleep, there's no Lilou, there's no IGOR. It's all withdrawn into the domain of the causal.
Yeah. I like what Wayne Dyer says, like it means edging God out.
Exactly. And so really the dying here, what we need to realize, happens at all times. Something constantly dies in us, constantly. And something is constantly being reborn in us. So not getting stuck anywhere and just remain in that fluidity is very, very important. It's one of the prerequisites of a true spiritual seeker, of a true spiritual aspirant, and I dare say adept, because nothing is taken for granted. Any level of self-realization has greater vistas to unfold, because really this is endless process. We have only now consciously embarking on very, very different journey.
Do you think things are shifting and changing? Do you feel it? You travel quite a lot.
I felt it.
People are opening up, or it's
I
become
felt it as a kid. So let's put it in the perspective that I always felt that there is something inherently there, something magical, something that is always about to happen. There was always this sense of urgency with a kind of a sense of anticipation. And I think that is that very cellular premonition of these changes. Then of course there are periods when we kind of go into slumber, kind of get a bit tired of it all, and we kind of find ourselves subjectified to a more inertia. But then we reawaken from that. And that's what really spiritual awakening is about, is to coming out of that self-imposed slumber. Consciousness is asleep to itself. It's in a state of homeostasis. It's want to reawaken again. It wants to experience its infinitude. It wants to experience its magnanimity. It wants to experience its divine status again. So it's no longer going to put up with just that temporal identification. So you see?
Yeah. Like the lotus, it closes at night, it reopens. Can we compare ourselves in our lives to that?
Why not? Yeah. I haven't quite thought about that, but it's a beautiful metaphor. I'm going to borrow it from you in my writings.
You can. So how do you get out when you have those moments, when we have those moments of doubt, of pressure or stress, or we feel contracted? What do you recommend to kind of just get back into the flow, and feel our divinity? Do you have a quick little? Is there little things that we can use in our day-to-day, or there's no quick thing?
I don't believe in quick fixes. I don't
like a little.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm first I'll say that I don't believe in quick fixes, because the quick fixes are short-lived phenomena. And what sometimes I have a little bit against New Age spirituality is precisely that. It kind of tries to address a quick fix, like whether it's a motivational talk or whether this is something that, or just to get more out of life, The real purpose of spirituality is really to find who we are, full stop. And that requires a certain degree of courage. It requires a certain degree of poetry. It requires a certain degree of vision.
Of stepping in the unknown as well.
Exactly. It's actually throwing, oneself at the edge where not knowing whether one is going to land or not, but that is the price very often. Because if we remain in a status quo, very little is going to change. However, that said, the quickest, I would say, fix would be to introduce a daily time when one can sit and simply listen one's own silence. Whatever one utilizes, breath, mantra, deity, something that is introspective, something that creates that inner stroke that directs the impulse from the outward, otherwise constantly at the mercy of the senses, mind, which constantly go out of itself. It has its opportunity to experience its own vibrations. This has tremendous benefits.
Yeah. It's like pausing. So it's like pausing. And we can do that in the middle of the day.
We can do that at any time.
At work?
Anytime. Once you introduced a certain, let's say, pattern, once you've introduced a certain pattern, let's say a little bit in the morning and a little bit in the evening, and then you tap into it, then you can actually tap into that when you are somewhere transiting. Let's say you're sitting, waiting somewhere, you just sat down for a cup of tea and completely you're releasing that. Because the meditation, that quality of inward direction, because when mind turns within, it begins to contemplate where is the greatest source of happiness. Because really, mind, by its very nature, is consciousness. But it's consciousness which has been taken out of itself, as it were. It's the surface layer. Yeah. That constant metaphor from the scriptures and New Age authors, the bottomless ocean of being. you know, and the surface level of that ocean is what the mind is, the myriad of waves. It's that what gives birth to forms and phenomena. That's all comes from that surface of the mind. As individuals, so is the great cosmic mind. So when we allow the mind to turn in, mind always wants to go to the direction of greater happiness. That's the mind's purpose, because mind is consciousness in its essence. So it wants to go to where the greater happiness is. So when it is given an opportunity to go inward, it starts searching, where's that happiness is, you know? First it's kind of wanders around, wanders.
At first there's the chatty noise of all the things we should be doing.
That's what the wandering is. And yet if we are persistent, what happens sooner or later, with some people it's so quick and so effortless, and it's just amazing. Mind just begins to sink. It just begins to sink, and that's when the transcendence begins.
Where does it sink? How do you visualize it? How do you visualize this sinking and then tapping? Because you talked about tapping earlier, so I want you to define it.
Something that creates a focal point. We have spoken earlier about the quality of attention. You know, there's extroverted attention that is required for now, for instance, for us to speak. We need to focus, even if briefly, on certain aspects, so that we know. When we drive, or when we cook, or when we converse, when we teach, when we receive, right? That there is this extroverted attention. In meditation, it's introverted attention, a different quality of attention. And to have a little bit as a help goes a long way. So the methodologies are there. These very seemingly simple meditative methodologies, they have proven to be successful. They have proven to work. That's why they've existed for centuries. They essentially, they're indispensable part of all spiritual traditions. Whether we look into the Orient or whether we look into the Occident, we can always find that the contemplative traditions existed side by side. Gnostic spirituality is all about experiencing God rather than believing in God.
I love Kriya Yoga. Can you name some of the techniques you found that are effective?
Well,
into dropping into...
I myself was trained, I mean, first of all, I was introduced into meditation in a dream. You know, there already was this kind of like initiation took place in a dream. But I was formally introduced into Transcendental Meditation. And I have met many people for whom Transcendental Meditation was a tremendous door opener. And also goes very important to mention that it's not just TM as such. There are many, many different techniques in TM. There are profoundly successful meditations in Tantra. You know, that the tantric meditations, you know, that meditations, that one of the most ancient meditations that are utilized on shorter gatherings based on breath. Because our breathing is that marvel, which, by the way, if you were really to push me to what would be the most immediate when someone is in the dire straits, someone is really feeling completely contracted, it's the martial arts, almost code of conduct. You turn your attention to your breathing, to your diaphragm, the seat of the law of vital. It's all here. It happens all here. When you turn your attention to your breathing, you're actually capable of changing the chemistry in the body. You see? So there are, but I wouldn't call them quick fixes, you see? It's more that you need to implement into your life and continue pressing with that search, with that self.
A daily practice, an ongoing practice.
Yeah, just like, you know, we have what I call mental hygiene. You know, like we live in time and age when there's so much soap sold, so many washing products, so many detergents. Like, you know, we love to rub ourselves, you know, wash ourselves. That's what meditation is. Why don't we wash ourselves sometimes from inside out? So...
Can you describe a little bit more of that tapping, what you experience when you're tapping there? Is that the divine? What is that? Is that bliss? What are you tapping into? This universal source energy? What is it?
Everything is the universal energy, absolutely everything. On the surface plane of existence, at all its strata, from astral to causal to transcendent to beyond transcendent, you know, so that is the first understanding, that everything is already divine, everything is already profoundly interconnected. We just need to align our frequencies with that interconnectedness of life. You see, The trees maybe do not have the luxury of move around in space, but they are forever in that meditative state of absorption. In human being, there's a possibility have been introduced when we can do a lot of things. But in doing a lot of things, we are kind of being washed away on the shore of our own glory. And it is within our capacity, within the capacity of our neurophysiology, within the capacity of our nervous system to come back and experience simultaneously this humanness and this divine nature. So when you ask me, how does it feel or what is it tapping in? For every person, for each person, I imagine it's unique to that person. You see? So we cannot categorize and begin. Yes, there are, and I myself often speak of the spiritual anatomy. Just as the breath follows certain path when we breathe, just as blood flows through the veins, there is this essentially spiritual anatomy, which is where these processes take place. But this is a high mathematics, perhaps, of the spiritual unfoldment. So I want to just mention here that inward stroke, that turning within, creates the possibility when mind begins to sink to where the mind arises all the time, when the universe comes towards the objectification, and that when we experience everything as more abstract, more transparent, less concrete. For some people, it may be just that, and it's not really accompanied by much bliss as yet. And this is why some people get disheartened, because, oh, well, I get definitely quiet, I get more serene, I experience more quietude, but I don't have these rapturous states of beatitude, bliss. It all depends on our individual setup, you see. But as we touch the ground, right, the ground, that scientifically, that Planck scale, that where the universe bubbles from with tremendous, with uproaring, right? But it's so subtle, this uproaring, that, and when we tune to that, then bliss is there, our essential nature. Bliss all there is. We literally find ourselves where we have always belonged, and that is bliss made manifest.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Igor, for this delicious interview. I know we could talk for hours, and I know there's a lot of videos out there, and people can find out more about you through your website, and there's tons of information. I look forward to having this conversation again, another conversation another time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is lovely. Really, really enjoyed it myself. Thank you.
Same here, and I'm sure everybody watching Two Delicious Co-Creators, we send you much love from beautiful Sedona, where the sun has set. Went to sleep. Until tomorrow. Bye.
Bye. Bye.